Over the years, you, John, as a composer, and Merce, you as a choreographer, have worked independently. How did your collaboration begin?
It was in the middle 40s, and John had come to New York. I was already there, and we decided to give a program together, and for which I would make the dances and John would write the music. And John had already talked about the idea of having a music which was not dependent upon the dance, nor the dance dependent upon the music, but which were separate identities which could, in a sense, coexist. And we worked at that time within something which he called a rhythmic structure. That is, we thought the common denominator between the two arts was time. And he had devised a form called rhythmic, which he called rhythmic structure, actually, within which we worked, where we agreed upon certain structure points, but within those structure points, the time within the structure points, we were free to do as the dance went and as the music might go. And that was more or less the first time that we began to work together, and then we've continued, and now the structure points in a way have disappeared, or it's a little bit like instead of going from Minneapolis to St. Paul, you go from Minneapolis to the moon. And there's a different thing about time.
It's less like an object and more like the weather. Because in an object you can tell where the boundaries are. But in the weather it's impossible to say when something begins or ends. We hope that the weather will continue, and we trust that our way of relating dance and music will also continue. It's not starting from an idea, not starting even from an expression of the same feeling, nor an exposition of the same idea, but rather simply being together in the same place and the same time, and leaving space around each art, so that neither art has to glue itself to a particular. There are exceptions, of course. In Merce's solo tango, which was performed here yesterday, there are 2 points in the dance that we try to have the sound specifically related to. When he throws the towel down on the floor, immediately the loops which have been playing in my vocalizing stop, and the television begins. And then when, half a minute later, when he comes to the front of the stage and points down, the television stops, and my drinking a cup of water with the throat microphone on starts. So that dance is not so much like the weather is, it is a dance that has 3 parts, or at least the music has 3 parts. Maybe you have more parts in the dance.
No, the dance is 3, 3 parts.
In general, though, you basically the only communication that you have with each other in doing the sound and in doing the dance is just a time frame. You just say it's going to be this amount of time, and
that was the practice anciently in India. Instead of having 2 arts, dance and music, they had an art called Sangita, which was dance and music together. And they had a rhythmic structure which was called tala, but they improvised in the talas. In the West, we've never had except perhaps in the Middle Ages, an idea about theory of rhythm, so that left it possible for us in this century to start thinking about time. And more recently, in 1950, when the use of magnetic tape for musical purposes became generally usable, we began to see a close relation not only between movement and music, but between space and time.
Who normally provides the initiation for a dance and music piece? Do you, Merce, do you say that, okay, this piece is going to be 10 minutes long, and then John goes off and composes something and you do your dance?
We don't even state the time length at the beginning. No.
Often with the composer, he will ask how long the dance is, and then if I know, I'll tell him. But if I'm working on it, I have perhaps an approximate idea of the time, but nothing specific. And so that even that can be left free, in other words. If he wants to know exactly, of course, I will tell him. But I'll tell him whatever he wants to know, but I try not to put anything in his way.
Because at the point where you're deciding that you are going to do a dance, you don't exactly know what it's going to be anyway.
And also, some of the dances that I make are so choreographed that they could, in a sense, go on and on. And I simply have to choose a point when I'm going to say, well, this is the end of this dance. Torse, for example, is in its entirety 55 minutes long. And the dancers have only done it once in an event, and that was enough. I wouldn't ask them to do it again. That was very difficult. And we ordinarily do it in 3 parts. The first part on one performance, the second part, and so on, the third part. The third section.
There was a misprint once in a criticism. I was at a program, and the writer said that Torres was 55 minuets.
Do you work under the same kind of system in that you're pretty much composing, but you're not really composing to a length? And then when the time comes where it has to be a certain length,
when the curtain comes down, we stop the music.
Is that's really how?
That's how it happens, really, in the theater, because no one, once the curtain comes down, no one wants to hear any more music. They've already begun applauding. I think the people are far more involved with their eyes than they are really with their ears. But the interesting thing about the ears is that you can hear things that are behind you.
That's true. Merce, do you ever find that when you are handed a piece of music that is to go with the dance that you've choreographed, that it's ever a surprise, and perhaps that it's an unpleasant surprise, the way the music sounds in conjunction with the dance?
There was a time once with a piece where we had asked a painter to work with us, and he had made some interesting, what I thought were going to be interesting objects for us to use. In a sense, they were sketches. They weren't really sketches, but they were kind of ideas he showed me, and some were things sort of made up, half made up, and so on. I liked them very much. And we were going ahead with this, but when it came to the actual performance, he had changed his mind and made things which were much bigger, much more cumbersome, and almost impossible to get on and off the stage, not just because of their size, but because that the actual stage space was such that there weren't any, the wings were difficult to get them in and out of, and that was the real problem. It was like a physical problem, which we simply couldn't surmount, and we eventually had to
Was that David Hare?
No, it was Neil Jenny. It was a piece called Objects, and we did it not very often because it simply wasn't feasible to do. If we put the objects on the stages that we were playing at the time, then the dancers couldn't have gotten on the stage. There wouldn't have been enough room. And then we couldn't get the objects off because there wasn't enough room in the wings.
Did that dance just disappear then?
Of course, we simply couldn't deal with it.
You just didn't perform the dance at all?
Well, we did. Yes, we did it once or twice probably, but it simply wasn't possible physically possible to deal with it. So we had to, so to speak, abandon it.
Does it ever surprise you how the dance and the music work together? Or?
Yes, I think probably since I don't, now with our pieces, I don't hear the music before the public does at the first performance, nor do the dancers as far as that's concerned. So that there is a certain element of surprise that comes into this. And I'm also, mostly I hear it in the wings. If I'm not in the dance myself, I'm watching from the wings. And if it is, because it is a new piece, I'm usually so concentrated on the dancing to see that the dancers get along all right, because they themselves are nervous about the fact that it's a dance they haven't performed. So that I don't hear a lot of the music the first time. The dancers, I think, hear more than I do. If I'm in the piece, I'm likely to hear more, but in the wings, I'm so busy looking, and it's harder to hear backstage anyway, I think in general. But, oh yes, I've been surprised, and I've also been delighted. so I think on the whole experience is toward the good side.
That's good. How about you, John? Do you feel similarly about your reaction?
I think it's lively and useful now in the society to be able to place one's attention not in just one way, but in two ways at least, like as with different music, different dance coming together. And then if we can go further than that and place our attention in three different directions, I think that would be even more interesting. And if we accomplish three, we could go on to 4, to 5, and so forth, so that we move toward a kind of complex use of our faculties that will suit us for our everyday life, which nowadays is coming toward us from all sides.
Have audiences been at all affected by this?
Well, Merce was talking with someone from the theater at the university the other evening.
Oh, yes.
And he said that he felt that audiences that formerly had difficulty with our work because of the independence of the music and the dance in our theater, we're now beginning to be able to enjoy it. And that's to say, times change. And now that we're more or less on our last legs, the audience is beginning to sit up and enjoy itself.
Finally. That's great.
Maybe it'll continue for a little while.
Hope so.
I noticed that when Merce became 40, that I think it was critics in London objected to his continuing to dance because they thought the dancers should be younger. But now that he's even older, no one seems to object any longer to the fact that that he dances.
Well, they don't voice the objection.
I think they're becoming interested in seeing how long this whole theater can last.
But you talked about the thing about the audience. The other last week we gave what we labeled an informal performance in St. Cloud on a rather in a sense, a difficult stage for dancing because it was a recital hall stage and it was hard and so on. And the musicians were at the back and the dancers, we were in the front. And John made sounds by moving around the side. He slammed doors and moved
the other
objects
musicians are doing electronic things.
And it was
but I was doing what you call acoustic sounds.
Yes, but it was, and sometimes I was on the side when I wasn't performing. I was listening and looking at this and thought it was quite a fascinating event.
The doors that slammed were the loudest doors I've ever heard.
But the whole thing of the sound and the kind of sound being made, and the fact that everything was visible, John was visible and the other musicians in the back and the dancers, and there were no wings. We would just go and stand on the side. So the whole thing became the theater, so to speak. And
when the audience came in, everyone was warming up.
Yes, but more than that, these are students, mainly a student audience, and sometimes when it's strange, as this might well be to them, they are likely to get up and depart and so on. And it was to go an hour, like the lunch hour. It's roughly like 1:15 to 2:15. And they were very attentive. It was a fair-sized audience, and they were very attentive to all this. And about 45 minutes after we started, a number left, but they all left at the same time, so I figured they must have class. So I thought, oh yes, that's all right. And the rest of the people stayed, and at the end of it, they had been absolutely silent, except for this time when the people left. The whole thing had been very, very quiet, and they weren't restless or anything like this. And it was clear to me that we could see the public very easily because of the lighting. The lighting was so minimal. That they were absorbed by what was going on. Whatever kind of judgments they were making, that doesn't matter. But while they were there, they were totally absorbed. And at the end of it, there was this very generous kind of applause to something that they had been involved with. And it's this has happened several times, but this time was very noticeable to me because of the particular quality of the sound, the fact that the musicians were all visible, that we were all doing this in a very flat sense.
When you have the independence of the music and the dance that we have, then the observer becomes the third point in a triangle and does what Marcel Duchamp spoke of. He completes the work, and each triangle is a different triangle.
Getting back to a point that you were talking about before, you both still perform. Is this something that you find is very important to your creative acts? In being able to, after choreographing or after composing, that you actually do perform? Merce, you want to?
Well, I started out that way as a performer, and I've just continued. And
he's committed to performing.
I don't perform as much as I used to, so that I suppose it's changing, like anything does. But it is part of my life. I think that's probably true, one way or another.
And John?
I could get along without performing, but I still have to do a little exercising now in order to keep my back in shape.
Both of you have used chants as the basis for either composing music or choreographing dance. How did you both come to the idea of using this technique in order to create works of art?
Well, I had studied for 2 years with Suzuki, the philosophy of Zen Buddhism, and I wanted to find a way to free my work from my likes and dislikes. And if you are not involved with music but are involved just with Zen Buddhism, and you want to free yourself from your likes and dislikes, you sit cross-legged, and go through various breathing exercises. And if you don't do them properly, you get hit over the head. Well, I wasn't going to do that, but I wanted to adopt a discipline that would work in the field of music that would be just as strict as sitting cross-legged. And so I chose first to work with the magic square, and then later I came across the I Ching, and that a means of working with the tossing of 3 coins 6 times to get 2 numbers between 1 and 64 struck me suddenly as being better than the magic square, that is to say, more generally useful. I think it's true because I began early in the 50s, and I haven't found any reason to shift to some other way of working. Though I include other means, I keep using those chance operations. Recently received, I was running out of printout because now I no longer toss the coins. I get a computer printout of the I Ching. And I recently received a million new numbers from Bell Telephone Laboratories. Some people think I'm the slave of these chance operations, but I'm grateful to them, and think of them as a utility, or something like fresh air or clear water.
Merce?
Well, I use the chance operations too. I use the I Ching in certain pieces. Taurus, for example, is totally devised through using the numbers from the I Ching. I have to add certain things which still could be found out through the I Ching, but I use other kinds of chance things like tossing coins and so on to decide whether it's how many people are going to do a certain phrase or whether it will be male or female or so on. Those kinds of things. In the use of chance is slightly different from piece to piece depending on how many people are in the piece, the kind of piece it might be, how much time I have to do a piece. For example, I'm making one now, working on one with 7 of the dancers, and I have a very short time to work at it, so that in using the chance operations I have to use a rather broad use of it, rather than as detailed as I might do ordinarily, because I don't have that much time before we are to present the piece. But I've found in almost every piece I've done for years now that if I really use the chance operation and follow it through, that it always brings out something that I don't think I would have thought of otherwise by myself, and opens out some new kind of facet or new kind of possibility. I sometimes can't utilize it completely. That's simply because I don't have time enough with the dancers to bring it about perhaps as completely as I would like to. But I try always to start from some general chance operation and then detail it as much as I have time for.
Before you even use the chance operation, do you put some structure or parameters around it, say a time limit or a space in which you want the dance to occur?
There are also practical decisions always that have to be made that simply have to do with human beings. And that, like if you're suddenly on the floor and then at the next moment you're supposed to be high in the air, you have to do something in between. Now technologically, you see, we could be there. As I explained to one of the students this morning, she asked this question. I said, well, with technology you could be at one moment there and the next moment up. But without that, just by yourself, you have to somehow get up into that. But I take that as part of the human act, as part of the humanness of it, if I can put it that way.
John, do you ever make some decisions even before you start using the chance operations?
What I try to do is to understand the field of possibilities in which the composition is going to take place. And then I ask questions which hopefully are radical questions that get at the roots rather than the surfaces of what will eventually happen. And then the answers come through the chance operations. I can rather quickly tell whether my questions have been radical or superficial, because what happens then will be either like a door opening or like no door opening, and if no door opens, then the situation is superficial.
Both of you use a lot of analogies with nature. Do you see a strong relationship between nature and the way you work together?
Oh yes. I always liked that. Those 2 paragraphs in the Lankavatara Sutra, when the Buddha was asked how enlightenment came. And in the first paragraph he said, well, it comes gradually. And he gave examples from nature, like the germination of seeds and other things that happen in nature gradually. And then without any explanation, he said, in the next paragraph, he said, it comes suddenly. And he gave examples from nature, like lightning and thunder, you know.
John, you've been working with the Merce Cunningham Dance Company for quite a number of years. What have you felt are the benefits of working with a dance company rather than just composing on your own? What have been the benefits?
When I first wrote music and offered it to musicians, they didn't want it and had no use for it. And they said that wasn't the way to write music. When I showed the same pieces to dancers, they said, oh, I'll make a dance with that. They were very grateful for it. I think it's entirely because of my close connection through my life with dancers that my music has been used in the society. There was a year when I had the commission from the Boston Symphony to write one of the bicentennial pieces that I couldn't continue with the Cunningham Dance Company, and so I left the company for a year or so when they went to Greece and to Israel, some other places, to the south of France. And then I realized that it was such a large part of my life that something that was really missing when I wasn't there. So I've returned to the company. However, I noticed that I'm thinking of leaving again. It's because next year I'll be 70 years old, and there are so many arrangements, particularly in Europe and even in Japan, being made that I have to go to, that I doubt whether I'll be able to tour with the company and fulfill those other commitments at the same time. As it is now, I bring my work with me, and I get a good deal done, because it's not really my life to perform. My life is much more involved in discovering, if I can, something new that I haven't yet performed.
Has your work with the Merce Cunningham Dance Company revealed anything to you about your composing?
Yes, I'm working with Paul Zukowski now, the violinist, and I'm finishing, hopefully within at least 1 or 2 years more, the Freeman Etudes. And playing the violin is a complicated physical action that resembles dancing. And I've had to make what Merce was talking about just a few minutes ago. I've had to make certain compromises between the straightforward working of the chance operations and what is actually physically.
How do you get from one thing to another on the violin or on your feet?
So that I let the chance operations operate, and then with Zukowski we find out what is feasible and what isn't, and we simply make those adjustments.
But don't you find with him sometimes
We don't find any conclusive thing.
No, what I mean is that something that he might have thought was impossible, and then you try it out, and then it turns out to be possible.
That happens.
Yes.
But then another thing happens, and that is that he says, I could do this, but he had meanwhile learned to do that.
Yes.
And so we change it to this, and then in concert he reverts to what he originally knew. In the throe of physical action and the complexity of the situation, because the pieces are not easy, he does what first comes to mind, and frequently what comes to mind is what he had memorized in the first place.
Of course, yes.
And has nothing to do with the music.
No, that's what's sort of in the memory, yes. That's
or in the muscles.
Yes, well, muscle memory, that's what it is.
I have the feeling in listening to both of you that even though problems may come up when you're working together, that you never really feel that they're unsolvable.
Well, there's always a way. Always some way
so to speak, the show must go on.
But there always is a way. Somehow, if you just keep at it long enough, you'll find some way to deal with it.